another screen. Ray's going to start recording, and I am going to be very pleased to, once I get there, hand over to James, and hopefully this will all go swimmingly, not if I do that. So over to you, James. Thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much, and lovely to see you all. A bit of background. My day job is a solicitor in the charity team at Russell-Cooke, where we look after about 500 charities. And so we're right in the middle of helping a big variety of people with a range of issues, from employment to property to money. I'm also locked down in Swanage, where together with Mel, who I see here, nice to see you, Mel, I'm a trustee of Swanage and Purbeck Development Trust, and so we're wrestling with the problems here. I hope this is helpful. You are going to be able to put some questions, which we'll deal with at the end by typing them in. I think, having said that, I'll move on just with a very quick look at furloughing. I'm not a particular employment specialist, but it's worth just revisiting it. I know not all of you have employees, but it is a huge relief to find that this is now likely to be going on until October. What is not clear is from June whether the amount of the payment by government will reduce. And so you do have to have some contingency plans if you are relying on furlough as to how you're going to respond if, for example, the government scheme reduces payments from 80% to 60%. One of the things we get inquiries about is who it covers, and it does cover a pretty broad range. You'll see at the bottom of the slide of people you work with if you fit within the criteria. There have been problems with recently joined staff, but in terms of the varieties of staff you use, that's possible. The self-employed, I'm afraid, are having a harder time because of the separate rules about 3 years average salary and a maximum cap, which means that many self-employed people who are doing a bit better fall out of the scheme. So it does cover a range of the other benefits that go to employees. So it isn't simply the basic salary, and many people are making very explicit that they're doing it in 3-week chunks because they need to review in a rapidly changing situation whether they're going to need someone back. And we are being told that there will be new flexibility to bring people back part-time. You can't do this at present. People can't volunteer for you, but they can volunteer for another organization. Far be it from me to suggest that you do a volunteer swap with somebody else. The people who are sick still need to stay on the statutory sick pay. One of the issues that is, as the time rolls forward, beginning to worry some people with furloughed staff is that clearly if people continue to accrue holiday, which they do, and the furlough continues for some time, at the point that somebody is due to return to work, they may have accumulated large amounts of holiday. And it's now been made clear that you can require staff to take holiday during their period of furlough. So it's not going to be that this is all building up and then will be a burden when you reopen. Okay, what's your regulator doing? Well, it does want to be kept in touch. It does know that people are having to close down, but it wants to be being told. It sees it as an important way of keeping in touch with what's going on in the sector. I hope you're all very aware of the serious incident reporting requirements. It is a sad case that quite a lot of charities were before this crisis unaware of the requirement and were not reporting adequately. The Commission is gradually ramping up its toughness in connection with whether or not people report. And they've also, however, made it much easier to report because they've got an online portal to make serious incident reports. And there is a second portal for less serious reports if you don't think it qualifies as a serious incident. Sadly, I have to say that the Charity Commission guidance on what is serious and what isn't always easy to apply. There is a very long piece of guidance on their website, but we are very often left in a position of saying to people, really, there are two issues that you can think about. One is, if in doubt, report, because you never get in trouble for reporting something that perhaps didn't warrant reporting. And the second is, if trustees think about something and say, well, this is an incident and, you know, it's not trivial, but we really don't think it's serious in the context of our organization. Let's say you've got £500,000 turnover, £100, then you're entitled to minute that decision, and the Commission have said, well, they won't come back and beat you up if they would have taken a different view. The other things they're doing is indicating that where they can, within the limits of the law, and that is a big proviso, they're going to loosen things up. So if you're due to be submitting your accounts and your key staff can't get to the books, or your accountants aren't responding, keep the Commission in touch with, if you're going to go beyond the 10-month deadline, but they have indicated that they won't be doing the usual thing they do, which is flag up on your website that you're non-compliant. And we all know that funders don't like to see that you're non-compliant. AGMs are causing quite a lot of difficulties. Many of you have got membership for whom the AGM is an important point in the year. It obviously has other functions, and in particular, there may be a turnover of trustees at that point and new elections. And there are a number of ways you can deal with this. The Commission has said that they are going to, if you can't comply with some constitutional requirement, they are going to show you a greater tolerance, so long as you've been seen to consider what the problem is and what the solutions are. And if you simply can't have an AGM, then, or you need to defer it, they won't be taking action against you. The Commission technically cannot relieve you of the obligation to comply with any requirement in your constitution. They can tell you that they're not going to take any action against you, but if your members were unhappy, or if somebody else was unhappy, you are still bound by your constitution. So what can you do in these circumstances? Well, a large number of people are simply deferring and hoping that the autumn will bring an opening up. A significant number of people are having hybrid AGMs, which is that someone comes to the AGM, generally just the chair, and everyone else joins by Zoom or some other mechanism. It is possible to have a completely virtual AGM where everyone joins by Zoom. However, technically, if your constitution doesn't already have provisions for these sorts of things, they can't be done. Now, having said that, given that the Commission and everyone else recognises the issues that you face, I think that if someone puts together an AGM which doesn't technically comply with the requirements in your constitution, because you haven't got provisions for virtual meetings, and you hold it, I see very little likelihood that anyone will take action against you. But I think it is a wake-up call to us all. Our constitutions tend to be documents that sit there on the shelf and we look at when we absolutely have to. And many people have not put into their constitutions provisions that allow electronic meetings of the board or trustees, allow people to attend AGMs by virtual means. And quite a lot of them, when we look at people's constitutions still haven't actually caught up with the range of requirements that came in 2006. So to give you an example, if you're a charitable company, you have to use proxies now, whether your constitution says so or not. And we still come across a very significant number of charities who say, oh, no, we just have meetings in person, whereas in fact it's an offence under the Companies Act, if you are a company, not to send everyone the option of doing a proxy voting. There are other routes to deal with the difficulty of having an AGM. Many of you will have a provision in your articles of the charity that if an AGM is not quorate, it can be adjourned to another date and held even though it remains inquorate. And some people have been saying, obviously none of you can come to this AGM, we'll have an inquorate meeting and then we'll adjourn it and get the technical business or perhaps sorting the elections out and approving the accounts dealt with at an inquorate meeting. So there are a number of solutions. They do depend on your own particular constitution. You need to have a look at that. And you need to think whether deferral is going to create difficulties. There are obviously the possibility, if you don't have a good constitution which is flexible and up to date, of updating that using written resolutions. But whether you can do that will depend partly on the numbers of your members. You need a 75% majority of members to vote in favour if you're a company. Obviously some changes are rather more complex and there may be different views within your organisation. So you'd probably only be able to put in place the least contentious provisions for easing arrangements for electronic meetings. But there certainly are things that can be done during this period. And when many of you are in lockdown and not able to deal with your primary purpose, perhaps because of the social distancing, I think it is a good idea to say, well, what could we use this time for? We could use it to look at some of our key policies. Things like safeguarding are tremendously important now, and people don't always have really good and compliant safeguarding arrangements. You can look at your constitution and you can look at your ways of working and see what have we learned from this whole process going forward, what might we change, and perhaps start to take steps to do that. Because hopefully, when we all get back to normal life, you'll be finding that you're very busy, and what seem like technical issues like sorting out and updating your constitution may slip back onto the back burner until some other event exposes to you how your constitution hasn't been updated and brought into compliance. Commissions obviously given us quite a lot of guidance on financial issues. Nothing particularly radical. Clearly, what they emphasize, as they always would, is balancing expenditure now to continue to meet need with preserving your ability to deliver out into the future. As with any crisis of this sort, cash is king, and we're spending quite a lot of time, sadly, with organisations who are having to navigate the possibility of insolvency or wind up. And it is really important that you have some mechanism that allows you to continue to monitor where you are on your cash flow. Many organisations, particularly those with bigger committees, have set up COVID or emergency committees to meet more regularly and to do an in-depth look at things like cash flow and other adjustments necessary during this period. Obviously, those committees need to report regularly to the board, but it is important to have a flexible mechanism which involves those people who've got the time and the skills to focus on this sort of issue. Some of you may have heard that the government has announced that it is going to pass legislation with retrospective effect which says that if you get this all wrong, and you thought you were going to be able to navigate your way out of this process, but you don't, and you become insolvent, that they are not going to allow an insolvency practitioner or the courts to penalise the committee for what is known as wrongful trading. Just very briefly on insolvency, there are really two key issues on insolvency. One, can you pay your bills as they fall due? And very often that is the real problem. You may have some assets, but you may not be able to liberate them in time to pay your bills. And the second is, do your liabilities exceed your assets? So what the normal rules say is that if you carry on operating and incurring debts and costs, having reached a position where no reasonable person would believe that you would ever become solvent again, then the trustees can be made personally liable for the debts of the organisation. We're talking here about charities which are companies. Now, they've said that they will not be prosecuting anyone in these circumstances and seeking to make them liable. Now, that's a reassurance. I have to say that in many, many years of advising charities, I've only once been involved in a situation where a liquidator did try and make a trustee liable, so it's not a very big risk anyway. If I could just say at this point, for those of you who haven't made the transition from a trust format or an unincorporated constitution format to an incorporated organization, this crisis does throw up yet further reasons for you to look very carefully as to whether you wouldn't perhaps be better off structured as a company limited by a guarantee or by a charitable incorporated organization, a CIO, because those bring limited liability, which I think all of us would feel is a good thing to have in a world with such substantial uncertainty. What else are they saying from the Commission? They're saying, well, this is a time when we would expect organisations to use their reserves, and many of you will have perhaps designated a reserve, perhaps for, I don't know, repairing the roof of your community centre or repairing some vital equipment. You may need to undesignate that money and use it for ordinary operating expenses, and they're quite happy to see you doing that. Sadly, there aren't any provisions for those limited number of you who have endowment funds, i.e. funds where you can only spend the income and not the capital, to allow those to be used unless you go through the usual processes, which are quite complex, to get them released by companies, by the Charity Commission. One problem that we still see in charities is that sometimes charities, trustees, in a situation like this, believe that the charity can do anything which is helpful for their community or for the people they work with. The objects in your constitution have always been rather narrowly interpreted by the Charity Commission, and you always need to know what they are and what the limits of what you can and cannot do. I was working with a charity recently which was repurposing one of its buildings to house farm workers who were going to collect crops which otherwise would have rotted in the field. And it was a good idea, but I don't think that even though they had broad objects, we're going to be able to say to them, that's something you can do within your charitable purpose. Now, we can do it another way because we can let the space at a commercial rent, but we can't be providing it free, even though it is helpful, obviously, to get food into the economy and not to have crops rot in the field. So you do need to say, well, whatever this need in my village or town that we should be meeting, can we just check that it falls within our objects and it's not what we lawyers would call ultra vires, Now, having said that, we have had some extraordinary speedy changes put through the Commission, where we've said to the Commission, look, this organisation believes it's the only one that can meet these needs in its neighbourhood, and it's got the capacity to do so, but it's outside its objects. Can we please change the objects? And in the most recent case, we put in the application at 12 in the morning and got a consent for the change of objects by 3 in the afternoon, which is a personal best for the Charity Commission, and compares very differently from a lot of our other experiences in the Commission, because simple registrations of new charities now, unless they're COVID relating, are taking months and months. And if you have any sort of complexity in it, they can take really a very long and unfortunately long time. So, as I've said, governance, what we're looking for is a flexible, workable system which has been authorised by the committee and reports regularly to the committee and keeps everyone up to date. I do think you need to try during this difficult period of keeping saying to yourself, what are we learning from all this? What is it about what we're doing now that is different and seems to work okay and perhaps saves us money or time? What is it about our structure that isn't perhaps as flexible and doesn't, trips us up when we try and meet a particular need in our community that we need to sort out? And what is it going forward that we'd perhaps like to see about the shape and structure of the way we work? The heart of any charity is its committee of trustees, and one of the things one I think always needs to look at is how strong are we? Do we have people with the skills to take us through this particular difficult area? For example, are we all of a certain age and perhaps not so typically brilliant with the IT, and maybe that indicates something we've all been aware of for some time, that our committee needs to get a bit younger if it possibly can, and to think about how to reach out. And I do think that you do have an opportunity now, because certainly here in Swanage we've seen an enormous outpouring of community activity by younger people who are normally busy with their jobs and raising their families. And I think it is an opportunity to go out and try and find those people and perhaps populate them onto your board going forward. It is absolutely crucial throughout this to think about what one might grandly call your communication strategy, and to really think out who you need to communicate with and why. Clearly, the organisation hopes it's going to burst out of this into new activity, and it is very important to keep those who support you fully aware of your continued existence and the steps you're trying to take, perhaps repurposing some of your existing functions to meet needs during this outbreak. I know that's not possible for everyone, but just knowing that you're there and are planning to take things forward would be really a good idea. Among the most affected, of course, are those who are furloughed staff, and clearly you need to think very carefully about that. Furloughed staff can take part in training, and there's quite a lot of training of various sorts out there, and I think that you need to think carefully about staying in touch with them and finding ways of involving them. And if you've got a very active emergency committee, keeping the other trustees on side and not letting that communication disappear. Somebody on your committee needs to be taking responsibility for funders. It's a very rapidly changing environment with people coming up with new programs. Dorset Community Action is a brilliant source of information for all that stuff. But you know, even if the information is out there, someone has to get it and try and work out which of it is relevant for you. I've been asked about specifically about opening up and how to prepare for deep cleaning. My spouse would say that I probably am not an expert on deep cleaning, but the guidance that I read really is very prosaic. I mean, basically they're saying soap and water, detergent, and in certain situations followed up by dilute disinfectant. I think there's actually a broader issue here, is that it's not just deep cleaning, but really looking at anything you do in terms of fresh eyes and a risk assessment, because anything that's been closed down may be in a not quite perfect state, and people may have left it, or things may have been interfered with. So a really careful, whatever sort of premises or equipment or function you have, I think before you restart it, you do need to think, well, you know, is it still fit for purpose, and is there anything that we need to do here differently? And I think that while nobody wants to create too many policies, if there are key issues, DBS checks for volunteers or whatever else, you do need to have them down in a policy somewhere, so that as there is turnover in your organization, key steps are not forgotten in the rush to reopen. So yes, the government has offered some very limited opening up and allowed a certain amount of activity to take place outdoors. But if you look at what they've said about the retail sector, it is really only a very limited number of particular types of shop that they're allowing to open up. So I rather doubt that most charities which aren't delivering services directly to people with COVID are going to find it very easy to open up at this stage. If there is something that absolutely needs to be done, clearly you need to, having done your risk assessment, have the clearest possible guidance to the individuals doing it about what steps they're going to take to protect themselves. And I think things like checklists are enormously helpful. I find it, I don't know about the rest of you, I come in from a walk, and do I always wash my hands? Yes, of course I always wash my hands, absolutely, while singing Happy Birthday to You twice. But you know, without the prompting, without some kind of plan about how you're going to open up and what steps those involved in it take, you could easily, I think, make a problem worse. I do think that it falls on all of us to be really imaginative about what we do and how we do it. And that also, I think, applies to when you're looking for money. I mean, most of the money is focused on directly relieving the impact of COVID. But there are many ways of doing that, and you are going to be entering into the, I suspect, a very tight financial environment. So if there is anything that you can properly seek to be funded at this stage, so for example, you may need better IT equipment to take advantage of the various IT digital platforms. You may want to make more of your offering digital, or take the form of broadcasts or texts or whatever else. So I think you need to try and think about what you do and how you do it, and what you might possibly need, and also start thinking about what will be the costs of reopening, reskilling and restarting. and to be applying imaginatively wherever you can for these pots of money, which I think will soon dry up and disappear in the post-COVID environment when we'll all be paying for all of this. I'm been told I ought to leave a little bit of time at the end for some questions, and I think some of you, if any of you have posted any, we no doubt will get them sent up soon.
Okay, James, we've got just one question from Meredy Phillips, who is asking, they held an AGM on Zoom and voted on email beforehand. Is this acceptable?
Wendy, the truth is I need to, sorry.
Meredy.
Meredy, sorry. The truth is, without looking at your constitution, which I'd be very happy to do, I couldn't tell you. The practical truth is, who do you think is going to feel that you've not done a good thing and not taken a sensible approach in a difficult circumstance? So there are, I'm sure nobody here has it, the odd charity with somebody who really likes to make a lot of difficulty and thinks the committee has never done it right. But if you haven't got one of those, then I would just sail on and look at your constitution for what might happen conveniently next year. So it's really a question of a risk evaluation, if I can put it that way.
Are there any others, Julie?
No, that was it.
Okay, I'd just like to say thank you very much, James. It's really, really informative. And hopefully everybody found it useful just with the updates. I have seen something from the Association of Chairs today about holding virtual board meetings. So do look out on the DCA website and e-bulletin for those sorts of information updates. And also, I mean, all the comments you made about policies and constitution reviews and things like this, I mean, by my fellow DCA community advisors, we see some very, very, very old constitutions and agreements. So these are all services that DCA can at least advise, point you in the right direction of. So again, we have fact sheets on becoming incorporated that might just help you get a bit more information to help you with that decision making, as well as information on safeguarding policies, risk assessments, lots and lots and lots of stuff. So please do get in touch. So thank you very much, James. It's been really, really useful. I've certainly found it useful anyway. I am now going to hand over
Could I just say that if anybody wakes up 30 seconds later and thinks they've got a question, if they send it to you, Anita, or to me direct at Russell-Cooke, I'd be very, very happy to do that. Or if people want to phone me, that's fine. My number's on the web.
Okay, well, are you happy to share that with on our website if we put it on the...
Absolutely.
Okay.
Russell-Cooke is doing sort of what I call 10 minutes. I've got to worry. What do you think I should do? Sort of advice free to anybody who's running a charity. So if you can't get me, one of my colleagues would be very happy to help. Perfect.
I mean, do take that offer up if you have a worry, because it will be invaluable to you. But thank you again, James, and for taking the time and joining us this morning. I am going to hand over to Paula now, who's going to give us some headline results from our survey. So over to Paula.
Thank you, Anita. I suppose the first thing to say is a massive thank you. If you're one of the 205 people that responded to our survey, then thank you so much. To put that into some kind of context, some of the national organisations have been putting out surveys over the last couple of months, and their response rate has been about 300. So for a one county response of about 200, I think is pretty excellent. So thank you very much. And it really gives some credibility to the results that we've got, and for some of the direction that we're going to be putting out about the support that charities and voluntary groups need in Dorset. And we'll be taking this message as far and wide as possible, presenting to the council. We'll also be presenting it to our local CCG, and we'll also be making sure that we share it with national bodies, for example, ACRE, to make sure that the particular rural issues in Dorset are factored into government thinking. So thank you, really, that's my starting point. So I'm going to share some slides. So I'm not going to go through every single question on the survey. Some of them are also partly for our internal benefit. So an opportunity for us to look at the kind of support that our sector would like from us. And some of it as well is to inform further thinking, particularly when we come back to you, probably towards the end of June, to ask you how you're doing now that with your plans for reopening, which is kind of out of crisis and into recovery. So what I'm going to present today really is just those real headline figures, which give a real flavour, I think, of where the sector is right now. So we asked in our survey the current status of our sector, and we can see that kind of overwhelmingly the largest section is groups that are mothballed or closed temporarily. And I think what that says is that we have to be preparing for recovery, and we need to be putting a little bit of lobbying pressure onto those funders to say that there's got to be funds left to support recovery. That although it's been incredibly important to support groups who are dealing with the crisis as it currently is, that actually we are not going to see that nearly 41% of services reopen without some help around recovery and restart. So it gives us a really good argument to be putting that forward to our funders, both local and international. I think it's probably also within this worth thinking about what that means, what the implications of this are for staff and volunteers. So about 53% have furloughed some or all staff. So we can see that's probably falling into that mothball closed, but it can't exclusively. So it means that some of those that are still delivering services, either at a reduced level or at the same level as before, are probably also working with some staff furloughed. About 50% of the groups think there will be some staff losses. So not all of those staff that are currently furloughed, or not all of the staff that are currently employed, will still be employed within the organisations within a 12-month period. It's to be expected, but that is a huge loss of expertise, a huge loss of experience for the County of Dorset. And it's something that we need to be thinking about, is how do we protect that expertise? And of course, the best way that we protect it is by protecting the charities so that they don't have to make such significant job losses. For the situation with volunteers, about 57% have some or many of their volunteers currently self-isolating. So there's going to need to be a big driver there on how do we get those volunteers back into service. Again, bringing with them their excellent expertise. Or how do we support them with their self-isolating and allow them to continue to volunteer, which might not be able to do at the moment. If you're a mothballed charity, there is no way that you can be engaging at that level with your volunteers. But as you begin to restart, you need to be having a plan for your volunteers that are still self-isolating, so that again, we don't lose that amazing expertise. It might be that we need to start looking at reallocations of roles for some people, that we move them from where they were perhaps volunteers out and about to where they're now volunteers, where they can actually be more home-based, like, for example, being trustees, something we always struggle for in Dorset. So we would welcome a whole new raft of people to take up those roles. We've also got to be aware that we have we have something now that we have never, ever had before, and that is a volunteer surplus. I actually never thought I'd see the day where I said there was a surplus of volunteers, but we do. We actually have NHS responders who have not been called into action. We have people who've come forward as volunteers where actually that cry for help has exceeded the amount of need that we've had. So we have quite a group of volunteers who are raring to go and would like to be utilised. So if you are currently struggling with staff that are furloughed, or you're struggling with volunteers who are self-isolating, so your numbers are down, please do go to the volunteer centre to see if you can make use of some of the people that have put themselves forward. Also let the volunteer centre know if they don't have the right volunteers for you, because we could be accessing the NHS responders. So please do put yourself forward. Don't think that, oh, this isn't the time for us to be asking for more help. It's absolutely the time to be asking for more help. And we want everybody who's volunteered to have had the best experience possible so that they continue to volunteer. This is the beginning of the great civic society. We've never been more community focused around what the needs are from our neighbour to our street. So let's build on that, and let's make sure that the volunteers that we have a fantastic experience. So whether your charity or your voluntary group is currently mothballed, communication is essential. And we're here to support with that. And the Volunteer Centre has those numbers, it has that support. Please do make good use of it. Okay, there's always a bit of a delay between clicking and changing. Okay, so this next slide looks at where we are between 3 months, 12 months, and perhaps longer. Now, at first glance, this is a really optimistic slide. 37.5% of groups that responded are saying that they will be around longer than 12 months. But there's a massive underlying figure there of 62.5% who either have closed, are imminently closing, or will possibly be closing within the next 12 months. That is a frightening statistic. The research that was done by Forbes post-crisis, looking at businesses and charities and what the rate was for those that survived, it was about 40%. And of that 40%, only about 27% of those were there 2 years later. Now, I've mentioned these statistics before, and as I say, we have to remember new comes along to replace some of the old that isn't about. So it doesn't have to be long-term as tragic as it might feel, but we can't let that be the shape of our sector as we move forward. And this gives us incredible data to be able to take to our partners and to say to them that actually this incredible civic response that you've seen is under threat and it needs support. And it doesn't need support 2 years from now. It needs support right now. It needs support within the next 12 months. So I think it's a very powerful, very impactful message. And again, we can only thank you for responding in the numbers that you did and coming forward with that. So clearly, why the difficulty? Well, obviously, it's going to be to do with income. And when we're looking at the reasons for why people might be under pressure with their income, it's very difficult to put those into categories. So we gave it a bit of a stab, and I think some of them are okay. I think probably I could have tweaked this a little bit better. So my apologies for that, because we've ended up with a very big other at about 40%. If you drill down the other, what we tend to see in there is other examples of trading. Membership is another thing that tends to come up in there, and also loss of grant income. So I think probably we could have got those in, and we'll definitely bear that in mind when we come to look at doing future surveys. What this has allowed us to do, it's allowed us to begin focusing on where we can support you with your recovery. So we're going to be doing a session next Wednesday. So our next Wednesday webinar is going to be on recovery around income streams. So we're going to be looking at doing an overall session about recovery. So that will be kind of the first part of the webinar. And then we will break out, and we're going to break out into 3 separate groups. The first group will be looking at venues, hire, loss of money through community rooms, all of that. The second group is going to be looking at trading, and that's both trading services and goods. So that's everything from shops, cafes, to selling products. And then the third group is going to be looking at one-to-one and group activities. So again, that's anything from training, coaching, to fundraising activities. But where you're actually, the big difficulty is going to be about getting groups of people together or safely working one-to-one. So we're looking, those are the 3 areas that we're going to be looking at. And that's been drawn together from this, looking at where the greater income losses are. We're going to be looking at groups that are both going to be restarting, but also continuing. So don't be put off if you think, well, we're currently working, because you still need to look at recovery. And again, don't be put off if you're currently mothballed thinking, well, we're not there yet. Now is the time to be thinking about it. So hopefully that will be a session that will be really useful. And as I say, very clearly based around what's coming up from this. So another big concern really for us was talking about funding. So if we've got a loss of income, what most charitable sector organisations would begin to do is look at funding to fill the gap. And although there are some really positive results on here, if you put together those that have already applied and those that are just waiting to hear the outcome, that's quite a significant number. But the big concern for us is that we've got such a large group for whom can't find any suitable funding or don't have staff and time to put to it. So at over 40%, that's a really significant grouping, particularly when we put it into the context of the other slides that we've looked at. So we're here to help, remember. Dorset Community Action can help you with funding bids. It can help you with funding searches. But also it's about starting to build up a picture of what your organisation needs. Now we've spent, I don't even want to think how many years, telling you to look outside of your organisation to what your community needs. And evidencing needs is never going to go away as being an important issue. But at this moment in time, it is about an internal look. What does your organisation need in order to survive? Start thinking about equipment that would mean that you'd be able to move from face-to-face to digital. Maybe you need more space. You're going to need to rent more buildings so that you can split class sizes or groups up. Maybe there is other equipment that you need, which will mean that you will be able to make your premises more accessible. That could be gazebos for outside activities. So really think, as I think James said earlier, as imaginatively as possible when it comes to looking at what your organisation needs. Think also about some of the practicalities like cleaning. Now you don't need to do a deep clean unless there's been an incident of COVID on your premises. But if you've been mothballed and closed for the last 3 months, you're going to need a really, really good clean before you can open up a premises. So that involves cost. And if it's not something that you currently factor into your day-to-day running, then it's going to be a new cost. And it's a cost as a result of COVID-19. So it's legitimate to go to funders to ask for help with that. You may also need extra staff in the short term, because again, you've got to split groups, which will mean working with smaller sizes. So really have a good look at what your group needs, and that will dictate the way that you'll be looking for funding. And if you're still uncertain, if you still can't find the funding that works for you, then come back to us. We can help you, put you either in touch with the right funder, the right funding, or we can at least enhance your search options by making your search as broad and as specific as needed, depending on the group. So all of that will be building into future dialogue that we have. I'm just going to stop sharing now. She says, yeah, there we go. Future dialogue that we have with you, and future dialogue that we have with funders, and of course with our stakeholders and the statutory partners that we have in Dorset. So that's just a little taste of some of the results, but I think you can see why it's quite exciting to have the figures at hand. One of the things that can be quite difficult is, of course, what that actually looks like. And as we begin to put the picture together, what we're seeing is the next 12 months are going to be critical for our sector, and we can't move away from that. And if we can't get that message across to the people that need to know, then actually the future starts to be looking less exciting. It starts to look less dynamic, and it will definitely be less civil. So fingers crossed that we get the message out there, and thank you again for having helped us with that. So I just wanted to end really just on a quick couple of bits around funding. Many people have asked questions about the business support loans that have been available, and we've had some really clear clarification come in this week around village halls and community centres. So if you are a village hall or a community centre, you are eligible for the Retail, Hospitality and Leisure Grant from the council, unless, there's always an unless, you are run or managed by a parish, town or Dorset council, because councils can't apply for the funding. But outside of that, all village halls and all community centres are eligible to apply. We will have the link, and the link will be put with this particular webinar. It will also be going out with our e-bulletin tomorrow. So if you haven't already applied, please do apply. It's worth noting that all village halls have been written to, but of course, if your village hall is closed and nobody's collecting the post at the moment, you might have missed the letter. So that's kind of why we're putting out the announcement. Also, a lot of the community centres, which are now being run or managed by community groups, might also have missed out on the information. So that's the Retail, Hospitality and Leisure grant. Just about to come online are the discretionary grants, which are made up of about 63 million that was allocated by the government. I think Dorset is looking at about 6.5 million of that coming to them. It's really designed as a mop-up. It's to catch groups that have fallen through the cracks. Now, charities have fallen through all of the cracks when it comes to the business grants. So this is definitely going to be one to look for. We will make sure we will announce as soon as it's open. I think it will be probably a small window, so it will be open for about 10 days. So our advice would be apply, and let them work out whether you're eligible. So don't necessarily put yourself into a corner about eligibility. Get your application in. The kind of groups that they're definitely going to be looking at is anybody that's got any kind of tourism focus. That's really important to them because it's been an industry that's heavily hit within Dorset, but hasn't necessarily fitted into the other grants. If you're festival or cultural based, there'll be an impact on not being able to run events. I don't think they'll be so interested in one-off cancellations, but if you do something on a regular basis and the funding from this year is what funds the event for next year, that's when they're particularly interested. Just have a quick look. Also, social enterprises, you'll be eligible to apply. So that's a really important one to look at if you've had a loss of income. And if you currently share buildings, so you haven't been able to apply as part of what is the rateable worth of your building because you actually share an office within a building, it will also open up to you. So we will get, as that information comes out, we will get that information to you. There's 3 new government funds that have opened up. So there's already the domestic violence and the food, sorry, I've forgotten the name of that one.
It's the frontline
charity
food
grant. Yeah, food charity grant scheme. It's just a bit of an odd name, isn't it? I think that's probably why. So we told you about those 2 already. The food charity grant scheme goes until I think it's the 6th of July, but do be warned that they are responding to them as they receive them. So they could go very quickly, could easily close before that date. So they're not waiting until the 6th of July and assessing them. They're doing them on a rolling basis. So it probably won't go as long as the 6th of July. So don't delay with that one. The domestic violence safe accommodation one closes on the 21st of May, so tomorrow, and it is a partnership bid. So really, if you've not already started to look at that, I would actually say that that's too close. The new 3 that have opened up are around the armed forces. So if you are involved in any way supporting, particularly around mental health and well-being, they're particularly interested in those. That's definitely worth looking at, and it closes on the 29th of the 5th. There's a loneliness grant opened up. Has to be said, it's aimed at national organisations, and the minimum is 500,000 for the bid. So I would say, unless you're part of a national organisation, you probably won't be involved in that. But if you are part of a national organisation, it might be worth checking back with them to see whether they are making an application, because I'm sure there'll be some fantastic experiences from Dorset that you could pass on to them. And there's a homeless fund, which I think is a particularly interesting one because it really is looking at local provision. You need to have 50% of what you're doing linked to homelessness, and you need to have a turnover of less than 5 million, which for most organisations in Dorset won't be a problem. And the closing date for that is the 27th, so it's a very tight turnaround. We have been assured that the application process is going to be simple for these grants. It's very difficult to see the applications ahead of time, so I can't confirm that, but we are being assured all the time that they've been designed in that way. It is worth keeping an eye on the government website for these grants because they're not necessarily getting a lot of fanfare when they come out. Maybe understandable because trying to keep them from being oversubscribed, but the deadlines are proving to be incredibly short. So you're looking at kind of about 2 weeks. So you could easily miss these grants as they come out. So this is part of that original 750 million that was allocated by the government. So about 160 of that was kept back for individual departments to allocate out. So that's where these are from. They're from individual departments, housing, DEFRA, communities. So they're coming out from the different departments. So it isn't new money, it's part of that original allocation of money. That was very garbled and very quick. It was just to make sure you got the headlines. We will make sure that the details are sent out to you in the e-bulletin, and they will also be available on our website under our funding. And of course, we will make sure that these links are available on our webinar page for after this session. So before I go, I'm just going to check to make sure with my team that I haven't missed any other significant funding alert. Fab. There's always something that seems to come in at the very last minute and then I don't know about it. Thank you again to James Sinclair Taylor. It was an absolutely brilliant presentation, really great slides, which I know that everybody will appreciate having access to, and some really good headlines. I will definitely take away the one from you about being imaginative. And I think that's exactly right. Sometimes we get a bit uncomfortable with creative because it sounds a little bit like lying. But imaginative means actually that we're thinking outside the box, that we're really expanding our thought process when it comes to what we should be applying for. So thank you for that, James. And thank you from us at DCA. And we really look forward to seeing you next Wednesday. Take care of yourselves, keep safe, keep well, and keep connected. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So nice to see so many of you again.
And anyone who would like